I think most people that play Dungeons & Dragons as a spellcaster have a soft spot in their heart for Fireball. I mean third level spells. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. It's the first major jump in power that your spells get. It's a really exciting moment as you get to dig through all these new toys and figure out what you want to take. The thing is though that some of those spells create way more problems than they're worth in some cases, and that's what I wanted to discuss today, the worst designed third level spells in the game. Now, I've made this exact same caveat every time I've done one of these videos, but yet somehow there's always a comment that seems to have missed the point. I want to be clear that I am not explicitly evaluating the power of a given spell. Very good spells are not necessarily poorly designed, and similarly, bad spells aren't necessarily poorly designed either. Niche spells that are rarely picked but do serve a function and serve it well are also not necessarily poorly designed. But to be even more clear, the power, or at least the relative power of a spell at its given level can be a relevant element of design to consider. It's just not the most important factor. The spells that I'm going to be looking at today fall into three main categories. Trap spells, ones that appear like they have some value or are good, but in reality they just aren't. Then there's extreme outliers, spells that are just so disproportionately good or bad that their existence is actually problematic for the game as a whole. And finally, there's what I call answer spells. Think Goodberry, spells that effectively remove an entire challenge or pillar from a campaign by virtue of their very existence alone. I'm going to be covering a wide variety of third level spells that span all three categories, so let's get started with Fireball, but probably not for the reason that you think. I'm currently trying to hit a goal of 7,000 subscribers by the end of April, so if you like what I do and want to help support me, a sub to the channel would really mean a lot. A huge shout out to all my members, Julian in the Champion tier, Jackal3 and Jumpy Sonic Bear in the Hero tier, and Julio and Siren XY in the Warrior tier. If you'd like to support me for as little as $1 per month and get some shoutouts, some members only content, early access to new videos, and so much more, click on the join button. Thank you. Yeah, so that little joke I made earlier about Fireball wasn't actually foreshadowing. Fireball isn't on this list because I really don't think it has a problematic design. The spell is very good, don't get me wrong, it's got great range, decent damage, a solid blast radius, but it does fall short in a few key areas. Firstly, it deals fire damage, obviously, but of all the creatures in 5th edition, 470 of them are resistant or immune to fire damage. That's nearly 20%. That's a lot. And then even for those that aren't resistant or immune to it, the spell targets a dexterity saving throw, which is probably the most reliable save from the target's perspective. And the damage just doesn't scale very well as you level it up. The spell is very good, but it's far from problematic, which is why it doesn't make this list. The closest it gets is probably for the crowding out effect, that being that it almost feels like a default pick, so it effectively reduces your choice by 1, but I really don't even think it meets that criteria either. I wanted to mention that to give an idea of what I'm talking about when I say that very good spells are not necessarily poorly designed. The thing about third level spells is that a lot of the badly designed ones aren't necessarily bad spells. They might just have some quirks about them that make them just not worth the cost of a third level spell. This is also typically where most would consider spells to be starting to get expensive, especially as it's likely the highest level spell slot that most people will acquire in their games. Alright, so let's get to the actual list then. In no particular order, here we go. First up is Conjure Animals, a spell that I've gone off on so many times, but I'll try and keep it contained this time. Also, it's worth mentioning that the spell has been completely reworked in One D&D for many of the reasons that I'm about to mention. Conjure Animals is available to druids and rangers, it costs 1 action to cast, it has a range of 60 feet, and requires concentration for up to 1 hour. The text reads, you summon fey spirits that take the form of beasts and appear in unoccupied spaces that you can see within range. Choose one of the following options for what appears. 1 beast of challenge rating 2 or lower, 2 beasts of challenge rating 1 or lower, 4 beasts of challenge rating 1/2 or lower, or 8 beasts of challenge rating 1/4 or lower. Each beast is also considered fey, and it disappears when it drops to 0 hit points or when the spell ends. The summoned creatures are friendly to you and your companions. Roll initiative for the summoned creatures as a group, which has its own turns. They obey any verbal command that you issue to them, no action required by you. If you don't issue any commands to them, they defend themselves from hostile creatures, but otherwise take no actions. The GM has the creature statistics, sample creatures can be found below. At higher levels, when you cast a spell using higher level spell slots, you choose one of the summoning options above, and more creatures appear. Twice as many with a 5th level slot, 3 times as many with a 7th level slot, and 4 times as many with a 9th level slot. There's just so many fundamental design issues with this spell, but like I said, I'll try and keep it succinct. Firstly, it has a massively heavy reliance on monster stat blocks. Yes, the spell description provides a list of sample beasts, but even just that contains 74 beasts to look through. That's already borderline unmanageable, and is an unnecessarily onerous task to place on a player, and also for a DM who's just supposed to have the stat blocks on hand. This spell requires you to prepare such an unhealthy amount of information, and not just that, have it available to use at a moment's notice and know which creatures you're also looking to summon. The other major issue with it is that 99 times out of 100, you're just better off summoning the 8 CR 1/4 creatures rather than anything else. Not only because they do substantially more damage, but creatures like the CR 1/4 wolf have pack tactics, so they all just get to benefit off of each other too. It's not only the power level though, it's the actual in-play management of the spell. All the current 2014 Conjure spells just grind the game to a halt. They're so slow and clunky to run, and I can't help but feel like they just suck the air out of the room every single time they're cast. If you want to hear some more of my thoughts about these and the changes made to them in One D&D, check out my video about the new Conjure spells. I'll leave a link in the description as well as the end cards. Next up is Flame Arrows. This spell is available to druids, rangers, sorcerers, wizards, and artificers. It costs 1 action, has a range of touch, and requires concentration for up to 1 hour. The text reads, you touch a quiver containing arrows or bolts. When a target is hit by a ranged weapon attack using a piece of ammunition drawn from the quiver, the target takes an extra 1d6 fire damage. The spell's magic ends on the piece of ammunition when it hits or misses, and the spell ends when 12 pieces of ammunition have been drawn from the quiver. At higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, the number of pieces of ammunition that you can affect with the spell increases by 2 for each slot level above 3rd. This spell, while not as egregious as some of the others from previous videos, is a trap spell, and not even a very good one at that. Like most trap spells, it gives the impression that you're going to be getting something good from it, but then once you stop, you take a second and actually read and think about it, you realize that what you're getting is just really, really bad. When you look at the spell, you might think, alright, this works out to 12d6 fire damage. That's more than a fireball. Seems like great value. But the reality is anything but. That 12d6 fire damage is spread out across 12 attacks, any of which can completely miss. And then are 12 arrow attacks even going to be made during the encounter? Probably not, unless you're giving a couple arrows each to some archers defending something, but then see the first problem relating to missing the target. Then, like I mentioned with Fireball, so many creatures are just resistant or immune to it. That's not to say that fire damage is bad or worthless, but each arrow is dealing 1d6, averaging 4 damage. If they're resistant to it, you're looking at 2 damage, assuming you even hit. And none of that even touches the worst part of the spell. It requires concentration. Now, I kind of understand why. They don't want you to be able to cast a spell on repeat and get a bunch of damage out of it, but honestly, if you're doing that, I have some other questions for you anyway. The spell doesn't need concentration, and honestly, it's still bad even without it. But for real, maintaining concentration on this and assuming all 12 attacks go off and hit and no one is resistant or immune to hopefully get 30 some odd damage and not be able to cast any other concentration spells is a big ask. The effect is simply just not worth the 3rd level slot, and oh man, is upcasting this thing just laughable. Next up is Hypnotic Pattern. This spell is so good, it certainly does not belong at 3rd level. And despite how disproportionately good it is, it somehow doesn't have nearly the reputation that something like Fireball has. Probably because it doesn't deal damage on its own, it's just not as flashy. Anyway, it's available to bards, sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, moon domain druids, oath of redemption paladins, and armorer artificers. The spell costs 1 action to cast, it targets creatures in a 30-foot cube within 120 feet, and requires concentration for up to 1 minute. The text reads, you create a twisting pattern of colors that weaves through the air inside a 30-foot cube within range. The pattern appears for a moment and vanishes. Each creature in the area who sees the pattern must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the creature becomes charmed for the duration. While charmed by the spell, the creature is incapacitated and has a speed of 0. The spell ends for an affected creature if they take any damage or if someone else uses an action to shake the creature out of its stupor. If you haven't read this spell before, it might still be unclear why exactly it's so good. The real power of the spell comes from the fact that it offers no repeated save to end the effect. If the creature fails, that's it. They're incapacitated and they can't move. This can be especially potent against a group of 4 or 5 or more enemies if you get to go early in the initiative order, which could be really easy with the new version of the alert feature allowing you to swap your initiative order with an ally. So you can cast Hypnotic Pattern, maybe you get lucky and they all fail or maybe 1 or 2 succeed on the save, Honestly, that's still not a problem. It's now just so easy to focus down enemies one at a time. And even if one of them decides to shake another enemy to wake them up, that's their action, so you still effectively made that creature use the bulk of their turn on waking up another creature. That's still totally worth it. There are some downsides, like you can't exclude your party members unless you're a sorcerer with the careful spell, and having advantage on charm effects isn't exactly uncommon. But honestly, this compares so favorably to something like Slow, which is also widely considered to be an incredibly powerful spell, and make no mistake, it is. But Hypnotic Pattern is available to way more classes, it doesn't offer a repeated save, and completely incapacitates the target and can dramatically swing a battle in your favor. The two obvious solutions here are just to make it be more expensive, like a 5th level slot, or keep it at 3rd level but offer a repeated save. I think that's the better solution. Quick side note, I also just wanted to mention the Fear spell because it actually has the exact same issue in that it doesn't offer a repeated saving throw unless the caster is out of line of sight. The solution here is identical to Hypnotic Pattern. Just allow the target to repeat the saving throw at the end of their turn. Next up is Catnap. This is such a weird spell that definitely falls into the category of being a trap. The spell is available to bards, sorcerers, wizards, and artificers and costs 1 action to cast. It has a range of 30 feet and lasts for 10 minutes. The text reads, you make a calming gesture and up to 3 willing creatures of your choice that you can see within range fall unconscious for the spell's duration. The spell ends early on a target if it takes any damage or if someone uses an action to shake or slap it awake. If a target remains unconscious for the full duration, the target gains the benefit of a short rest, and it can't be affected by the spell again until it finishes a long rest. At higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, you can target 1 additional willing creature for each spell slot level above 3rd. This spell just kinda makes no sense. Its real advantage here is that it allows you to gain the benefits of a short rest within 10 minutes. Okay, the logic here being that if you're in a potentially dangerous situation and need a quick rest, this gives you that opportunity. The problem is that it knocks you unconscious in order to obtain that benefit. So while you might gain this benefit of time, you're now probably in a much more vulnerable situation, not to mention that it's probably a pretty rare occurrence to have 10 minutes, but not an hour to short rest normally without being unconscious. I think the biggest problem with Catnap though is really just that rope trick exists. It's also on both the wizard and artificer's lists and isn't limited to just 3 people. It also conveniently lasts for the entirety of a short rest and doesn't knock you unconscious. Sure, there probably are some incredibly situational cases where Catnap can be used, like if you've got a warlock and they really need those spell slots fast for some reason, but it's really difficult to justify this for a 3rd level slot. Next is Protection from Energy. This spell is available to clerics, druids, rangers, sorcerers, wizards, and artificers, and a whole bunch of other subclasses. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of touch, and requires concentration for up to 1 hour. The text reads, for the duration, the willing creature you touch has resistance to 1 damage type of your choice: acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. Now, I'm not gonna lie, gaining resistance can be a very powerful thing, but not when it's a 3rd level spell slot that also requires concentration. Let's talk about that. Not being able to cast any other concentration spells for the benefit of a resistance to 1 of a few damage types while you maintain concentration is a lot. Also, the only reason this thing requires concentration really is so that you can't just cast it on multiple party members at the same time and grant everyone a resistance or one person a ton of different resistances. But there's a few problems with that. Firstly, I'd argue that having it cost a 3rd level spell slot kinda does that job for you. But more to the point, if they didn't want multiple people to be able to cast it, then why would they put it on basically everyone's spell list? It makes no sense. Now, multiple people can cast it on the group, and you can even distribute the cost of it really nicely if you wanted to. Anyway, insane concentration requirement aside, this is just a really tough pill to swallow for a 3rd level spell. It's worth noting that it doesn't cover necrotic, poison, psychic, radiant, or force damage, so there's that. The spell is also made significantly worse by the existence of Absorb Elements, which is available to nearly the exact same group of casters, minus all of the subclasses. While Absorb Elements is limited to melee attacks, it does at least cover all damage types, it's a reaction, and doesn't require foreknowledge, and gives a small damage boost as well, and is also a 1st level spell. Next up is Leomund's Tiny Hut, a spell that I've also talked about before, so I'll try and keep it brief. It takes 1 minute to cast, but can be cast as a ritual. It has a range of self and generates a 10-foot radius sphere and lasts for 8 hours. The text reads, a 10-foot radius immobile dome of force springs into existence around and above you and remains stationary for the duration. The spell ends if you leave its area. 9 creatures of medium size or smaller can fit inside the dome with you. The spell fails if its area includes a larger creature or more than 9 creatures. Creatures and objects within the dome when you cast this spell can move through it freely. All other creatures and objects are barred from passing through it. Spells and other magical effects can't extend through the dome or be cast through it. The atmosphere inside the space is comfortable and dry regardless of the weather outside. Until the spell ends, you can command the interior to become dimly lit or dark. The dome is opaque from the outside, of any color you choose, but it is transparent from the inside. So the thing about Leomund's tiny hut is that it takes a core assumption of the game that resting can be dangerous, and largely throws that out the window. You and your 8 closest friends can completely safely long rest in here, almost irrespective of the exterior circumstances. There is nothing that can be done to destroy or penetrate the barrier from the exterior in any way. So you can absolutely go through the effort of concealing it in some way if you really wanted to, but even if you don't and enemies come upon your tiny hut, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from safely completing your long rest and preparing to launch an assault against those outside. Especially you can see them, but they can't see you. This is a prime example of what I call an answer spell. Probably the worst thing about it though is that it doesn't even necessarily cost any resources, since if you've got 11 minutes to spare, which you probably do, you don't need to spend your 3rd level slot on it. It also has the capability in many, but not all, situations to completely trivialize resting, and I think that just feels kinda lame. The solution to me is simple, just give the hut an AC and hit points and let it be able to be destroyed. And before anyone comments, yes, the dome does have a floor, this has been confirmed, so not even burrowing creatures can exploit it. On the topic of answer spells, I also wanted to give a quick mention to Create Food and Water, another spell I've talked about before. The very existence of the spell completely trivializes the need for rationing food and water. To be clear, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm going to or that I even want to start tracking food and water consumption in my games. It sounds awful and tedious, and I'm not here for that. But there are certain types of campaigns, like the first chunk of Tomb of Annihilation, and elements of other campaigns that can be completely unraveled by a single 3rd level spell, and that just feels like a shame. Last time I mentioned the spell, some commenter said that obtaining food and water just shouldn't be a problem for higher level parties, and I don't know, I don't really buy that. To me, food and water, it's like the great equalizer. Anyway, if you want to hear more of our thoughts about it, I'll leave a link to the video below and in the end cards as well. The last spell that I wanted to talk about is Remove Curse, but this is a bit of a weird one, as it isn't so much the design of the spell, as it is the existence of the spell and the way that it interacts with the curse mechanic in the game. I think I can probably classify this one as an honorable mention. I don't know about you, but I know that anytime I look at items or effects that would cause an interesting curse, I always just think to myself, well, they have Remove Curse, so it's not gonna actually do anything. And that's just such an unfortunate reality for an entire mechanic in the game to be undone by the existence of one single spell. So much so that, to me, they're not even really worth trying, but let's read the spell. Remove Curse is available to clerics, paladins, warlocks, and wizards. It costs 1 action to cast, has a range of touch, and takes effect instantaneously. The text reads, at your touch, all curses affecting one creature or object end. If the object is a cursed magic item, its curse remains, but the spell breaks its owner's attunement to the object, so it can be removed or discarded. The thing about curses in D&D more broadly is that I feel like they're just such an underexplored element of the game, but that's probably simply because of this spell. But on the flip side to that, it's kind of hard to imagine a magical world where you wouldn't have the ability to remove a curse, so it kind of feels necessary to the world. I don't really know what the solution to this is. The issue isn't the cost of the spell. Making Remove Curse more expensive doesn't really solve anything. There's already curses in the game that require you to remove them through the use of Greater Restoration or even Wish, which is just really delaying the level at which you can instantly solve this problem. To me, there's nothing really interesting about that, which feels really unfortunate since I really love the idea of curses, but their implementation in the game just leaves so much to be desired that I just don't bother. Again, this isn't really the fault of the design of the spell, it's more of a commentary on the state of curses in D&D in general. Maybe that deserves a video of its own though. Anyway, that is it. That is my list of the worst designed 3rd level spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm sure I'll get absolutely roasted in the comments for some of these picks, which is totally fine, have at it. Let me know what I got wrong, or maybe right, I'll gladly take some ego stroking too. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Consider subscribing to help me reach that goal of 7,000 subscribers by the end of April. Check out some of my other D&D videos, but otherwise, take care.